Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village Diary by Miss Reed. September. Earl arrived on the doorstep at 9:30 this morning, armed with a box of chocolates, a bouquet of pink carnations, and a note of thanks and farewell from his parents. It was a typically American gesture of generosity and courtesy, and I was much touched. "We're off to Southampton right now," said Earl when I asked him in, "so I mustn't." He offered me his hand solemnly. "Well, I guess it's good-bye," he said, pumping mine energetically up and down. He nodded his crew cut across at the little school. "That's the best little school I've ever been teached at," he said warmly. I watched him run up the lane, somewhat comforted by this compliment. I shall not forget Earl. He and his classmates at Fairacre School have been living proof of Anglo-American friendship. Mr. Roberts brought me over a basket of plums this evening, the first, I suspect, of many which will find their way from generous neighbors to the schoolhouse. He told me that Abbott, his cowman, is leaving him at Michaelmas. "He's got a job at the research station, evidently," said Mr. Roberts. "His brother's there already, and he's found them a house nearby. Another good man leaving the village. I don't like to see it." I asked him why he was going. "Well, the hours are shorter, for one thing. Cows have to be milked Sundays and all, and there's no knowing when a cowman may not have to spend a night up with a sick cow. It's heavy work, too. I think the women have a lot to do with their menfolk leaving the land. They look upon farm work as something inferior. If they can say, 'My husband works at Garfield' instead of 'at Robert's old farm,' they feel it's a step up in the social ladder." "Will he get more money?" I asked. "Yes, he will, but his rent will be 3 times what it is now, and though I says it shouldn't, he will be lucky to find as easy a landlord." I knew this to be true, for Mr. Roberts' farm cottages are kept in good repair. "Oh, yes, his pay will go up," said Mr. Roberts somewhat bitterly, "but what a waste of knowledge. It's taken 40 years to make that good cowman. I'd trust him with a champion, that chap, and all that's to be wasted on some soulless routine job that any ass could do. And where am I to get another? The days have gone when I could go to Caxley Michaelmas Fair and give my shilling to one of a row of good cowmen waiting to be hired, as my father did." I felt very sorry for Mr. Roberts as he stood kicking morosely with his enormous boots at my doorstep, pondering this sad problem. This is only one case among many of old village families leaving their ancient home and going to bigger centers to find new jobs. There must be some positive answer to this drift from the country to the town. It cannot only be the promise of high wages that draws the countryman, though naturally this is the major attraction, offering as it does an easier mode of living for his wife and family. "I picks up £5 a week for doing nothing," boasted one elderly villager recently. Sad comment indeed if this is true on the outlay of public money and on his own starved mental outlook. Perhaps, for a family man, the advantages of bigger and more modern schools for his children are an added incentive, and I thought again of Mr. Annet's outburst about his own all-standard country school, which, he is clear-sighted enough to see, runs a poor second to a new secondary modern school, which can offer so much more to his older children. The new school year started today, and we have 43 children in Fairacre School. Miss Jackson is ensconced in the infants' room with 20 children aged from 5 to 7, and I have the rest up to 11 years of age in my class. Among the new entrants is Robin Pratt, who created such a dramatic stir one year when we went on our outing to Beresford by suffering an accident to his eye. His sister Peggy has been promoted to my class this term, and as Robert was rather fearful on his first morning, he was allowed to sit with her until he felt capable of facing life in the infants' room without any family support. His eye has suffered no permanent damage, and he's going to be a most attractive addition to the infants class. Miss Jackson has been unable to get lodgings in the village and is with me at the moment. She's rather heavy-going and inclined to tell me what in a way which I find mildly offensive. However, I put it down to youth and perhaps a little shyness, though the latter is not apparent in any other form. Getting her up in the morning is going to be a formidable task, I foresee, if she sleeps as heavily as she did last night. It was 8 o'clock before I finally roused her, and my fifth assault was upon the spare room door. The wet weather, which persisted through the major part of the holidays, has now, naturally enough, taken a turn for the better. The farmers look much more hopeful as they set about getting in a very damp harvest, and Mr. Roberts' corn dryer hums a cheerful background drone to our school day. To my middle-aged eye, the new entrants appear more baby-like than ever, and my top group more juvenile than ever before, but this, I find, is a perennial phenomenon, and I can only put it down to an advancing age on my part. For I notice, too, these days, how irresponsibly young all the policemen look, and on my rare visits to Oxford or Cambridge, I find myself looking anxiously about to see who is in charge of the undergraduate innocents dodging at large among the traffic. Yesterday evening, Mr. Maughan called at the schoolhouse bearing yet another basket of plums. This makes the 7th plum offering to date, and they are really becoming an embarrassment. Miss Jackson and I were about to start our supper of ham and salad, and we invited him to join us. This he seemed delighted to do, making a substantial meal and finishing up all the cheese and bread in the house, so that we were obliged to have our breakfast eggs this morning without toast, but with rye vita. He told us in some detail about his correspondence with his friend Huguet on the subject of the purple sandpiper, and it was 11 o'clock before he made a move to return to his own home. Miss Jackson bore up very well, taking a markedly intelligent interest in all Mr. Maughan's exhaustive, and to my mind exhausting, data on birds. But I was in pretty poor shape by 10 o'clock, answering mechanically, "Oh, and really?" between badly stifled yawns. Although I am not averse to Mr. Maughan and realize that his life is, as he himself has frequently told me, a trifle lonely, yet I must confess that, to put it plainly, I find him a bore. "What an interesting man," enthused Miss Jackson, and I closed the front door thankfully upon him. "He's just what you need, a really stimulating companion." More dead than alive, I crawled to bed. This morning, Mrs. Pringle said that she hoped I'd enjoyed my evening with Mr. Maughan, and it was shameful the way his underclothes wanted mending. "I'm doing for him while his housekeeper's having her fortnight's break," she told me. "If ever a man needed a woman to look after him, that poor Mr. Maughan does. He sits about moping in an armchair with me dusting round him, as you might say, and not a rag has he got to his back that doesn't need a stitch somewhere." I said with some asperity that this was no concern of mine, and had she removed my red marking pen from the inkstand. Ignoring this retreat to safer ground, Mrs. Pringle sidled nearer, dropping her usual bellow to an even more offensive lugubrious whine. "Ah, but there's plenty thinks as you should make it your concern. He's fair eating his heart out, and the whole village knows it but you." This was the last straw. I had suffered enough, heaven knows, from hints and knowing glances lately, but now that Mrs. Pringle had the temerity and impertinence to bring this into the open, I had the chance to put my side plainly. I pointed out with considerable hauteur that she was doing a grave injustice to Mr. Maughan and to me, that to repeat idle gossip was not only foolish but could be scandalous, in which case I would have no hesitation in asking for my solicitor's advice and recommending Mr. Maughan do the same. At the dread name of solicitor, even Mrs. Pringle's complacency buckled, and seeing her unwanted abjection, I hastened to press home my attack. "Understand this," I said, in the voice I keep for those about to be caned. I will have no more behindhand tittle-tattle about this poor man and me. I count upon you to give the lie to such utter rubbish that is flying about Fairacre. Meanwhile, I shall write for legal advice this evening." Purple-faced but silent, Mrs. Pringle positively slunk back to her copper in the lobby, whilst I, full of righteous wrath, looked out our morning hymn. "Fight the good fight" seemed a proper choice as any, and my militant rendering so shook the ancient piano that quite a large shred of red silk fell from behind its fretwork front and landed in the viciously pounded keys. Throughout the day, Mrs. Pringle maintained a sullen silence, and, as I expected, arrived at the schoolhouse after tea to give in her notice. This is the 8th or 9th time she has done this, and as usual, I accepted it with the greatest enthusiasm. "I am delighted to hear that you are giving up," I told her truthfully. "After this morning's disclosures, it's the best possible thing for you to do." Mrs. Pringle bridled. "Never been spoken so to in my life," she boomed. "Threatened me, that's what you done. I said to Pringle, I've had plenty thrown in my face, but when it comes to solicitors, well, so you must make do without me in the future." I said that we should doubtless manage very well, wished her good night, and returned to the sitting room. Miss Jackson looked up with a scared expression. "I say, what an awful row. What will you do without her?" "Enjoy myself," I said stoutly. "Not that I shall get the chance. She'll turn up again in a day or two, and as there's really no one else to take the job on, we'll shake down together again, I expect. It'll do her good to lose a few days' pay and to turn things over in her mind for a bit. Offensive old woman." Much exhilarated by this encounter, I propped up on the mantelpiece a grubby scrap of paper, torn from the rent book I suspected, on which Mrs. Pringle had announced her retirement and suggested that we celebrate with a bottle of cider. "Lovely," said Miss Jackson, catching my high spirits and beaming through her unlovely spectacles. "And if you like, I'll make tomato omelets for supper." And very good they were. I have paid my promised visit to the Annetts to see Malcolm, not Oswald, I'm relieved to know. He is a neat, compact little baby who eats and sleeps well and is giving his mother as little trouble as can be expected from someone who needs attention for 22 hours out of 24. I felt greatly honored when I was asked to be godmother and accepted this high office with much pleasure, for although I have 2 delightful goddaughters, this will be my only godson. The christening is fixed for the first Sunday in October, and I'm looking forward to a trip into Caxley to find a really attractive silver rattle and coral worthy of such a fine boy. "My brother Ted is to be one of the godfathers," said Mr. Annett, "and Isabel's cousin, who's in the Merchant Navy, is the other. With any luck, he may have shore leave just then. If not, I'll stand proxy." He rubbed his hands gleefully. "I must say I enjoy a party," he went on. "We'll have a real good one for every baby we have. Will you take it as a standing invitation?" I said indeed I would, and that I looked forward to many happy occasions. But Mrs. Annett, I noticed, was not so enthusiastic. As is customary in Fairacre at harvest time, the children at the school helped to decorate the church for Harvest Festival. Mr. Roberts sent over a generous sheaf of corn, and the children had a blissful morning tying it into small bundles to decorate the ends of the pews. The floor was littered with straw and grain, and I was glad that Mrs. Pringle had given in her notice and that we could make as much mess as we liked without hearing many sour comments when that lady was passing through the classroom. Miss Jackson was inclined to be scathing about our efforts and also about the use to which we should apply the fruits of our labors. "Straw," she announced, "is a most difficult medium for children to work in. Why, even the Ukrainians, who are acknowledged to be the most inspired straw workers, reckon to serve an apprenticeship, or so our psychology teacher told us." One of the Coggs twins held up a fistful of ragged ears for my inspection at this point. "Lovely," I said, tying it securely with a piece of raffia. "That will look very nice at the end of a pew." Flattered, she swaggered back to her place on the floor, collecting her second bunch with renewed zest. Miss Jackson looked scornful. And I don't know that it's not absolutely primitive. All this corn and fruit and stuff makes one think of fertility rites. I did a thesis on them for Miss Crabbe at college. Harvest Festival, I said firmly, is a good old Christian custom, and we here in Fairacre put our hearts into it. If you object to such practices, I don't quite know why you have accepted an appointment at a church school. She had the grace to look abashed, and the preparations went forward without further comment, except for one dark mutter about it being a good thing that Miss Crabbe, the psychology lecturer who seems to have exerted a disproportionate influence on my assistant, doesn't live in Fairacre, with which statement I silently concurred. In the afternoon, we all trooped over to the church, bearing our corn bundles, about 2 bushels of plums, 6 bulbous marrows, and some rather dashing Cape gooseberries. The children love decorating the church and do their part very well. The boys slashed the corn to the pew ends, while the girls threaded Cape gooseberries through the altar rails and put a neat little row of plums, with the marrow at regular intervals, along the foot. It all looked very formal and childlike, and none the less effective for that. The tranquil atmosphere of the church did much to soothe our nerves after the excitement of the morning, and we returned much refreshed in spirit to practice "We Plow the Fields and Scatter," ready for the great day. And so busy were Miss Jackson and I trying to wean our charges from singing "But it is fed and war-ar-artered" that it was time to send them home before we knew where we were. I usually do my washing on Saturday morning and ironing, if I've been lucky with the weather, just after tea. With the kitchen door propped open, I have a very pleasant view of the garden. I find ironing one of the less objectionable forms of housework, for it is quiet and clean and warm, 3 attributes which rarely come together in other household activities. Miss Jackson manages to get home most weekends, which gives me time to catch up with all the little jobs which a school mistress has to leave until then, without bothering overmuch about Saturday's meals. This weekend she relieved me of 2 large vegetable marrows, which she said her mother would welcome for jam. The spate of plums has begun to slacken, but marrows, alas, are arriving in a steady stream at the back door. As Miss Jackson and I can only cope with about half a marrow between us in a week, I can see that I shall have to start digging under cover of darkness and inter the unwieldy monsters. To give them away again in Fairacre itself might cause the greatest offense. In any case, every garden seems to boast a fertile heap swarming with flourishing marrows. Oddly enough, the majority of people who grow them in Fairacre say as they hand them over, "Funny thing, I don't care for them myself. In fact, none of the family likes them." But they still plant them. It must be the fascination of seeing such a wonderful return from one small seed that keeps marrow growers at their dubious task. As I ironed, I amused myself by watching a starling at the edge of the garden bed. He was busy detaching the petals from an anemone, conscious that I was watching and half afraid, but persisting in his destruction. His iridescent feathers, as smooth and sleek as if oil had been stroked over them, gleamed like chainmail in the level rays of the sinking sun. Having finished with the anemone, he began to run, squawking, about the lawn, his feet thrown rather high and forward, which gave him a droll, clown-like air. In time, others joined him, and I realized that they had found the remains of Tibby's cornflakes, which I had thrown out. Chattering, quarreling, and complaining, they threw themselves energetically into this job of self-nourishment. As suddenly they had arrived, they checked, and then whirled away over the house. This short scene, as I thought as I pressed handkerchiefs, is typical of the richness that surrounds the country dweller, and which contributes to his well-being. As he works, he sees about him other ways of life being pursued at their own tempo. Not only animal life, but that of crops and trees, of flowers and insects, all set within the greater cycle of the 4 seasons. It has a therapeutic value, this awareness of the myriad forms and varied pace of other lives. Man, particularly the town dweller, scurrying to catch up with what he considers the important jobs, which none but he can do, presses himself onward at a crueler pace daily. He scuttles from stone and steel office to arid tube station. If he sees a blade of grass prizing its way between the paving stones, it only registers itself to his overwrought brain as something which should be reported to the corporation. Small wonder that sleeping pills lie within reach of so many tousled beds when man has lost sight of the elementary fact that he must go at his own pace or face the consequences. 2 other benisons are more generously bestowed in the country: solitude and handling earth. Not to be alone, ever, is one of my ideas of hell, and a day when I have had no solitude at all in which to catch up with myself, I find mentally, physically, and spiritually exhausting. When one is alone, one is receptive, a ready vessel for the sights and scents and sounds which pour in through relaxed and animated scenes to refresh the inner man. As for the healing that lies in the garden, let Mr. Willett's wise words be heard. Proper twizzled up was I after that row with the parish council. I went and earthed up my celery on my own. That sorted me out a treat. While Mrs. Pringle has been preserving a dignified silence at her cottage for the last week, Minnie Pringle has called in after school to give us a lick round, as she so truly says. It is convenient for her at the moment, as she spends most of the day at Mrs. Annet's, leaves there at 3:30, and arrives here about 10 to 4, ready for her labors. She then cycles on to Springbourne. We finish our last lesson of the day and sing our grace to the accompaniment of Minnie's clatterings in the lobby as she washes up the dinner things. In theory, Miss Jackson, whose room leads into the kitchen lobby, switches on the copper at 3:15, but for 3 days it has slipped her mind, and Minnie arrived to find a copper full of cold rainwater, in which swam 6 hearty earwigs. Good thing you never switched it on, was her comment. Think of they poor little dears being boiled alive like lobsters. Miss Jackson, when I reminded her about the copper, said that her mind was so engaged with the harvest project in her classroom and in making out a case history for each child, which she was amazed to find had never been done in Fairacre, despite the strong recommendations of the Perth-Pullinger Investigating Committee as long ago as 1952, that she very much doubted if she could wrench it from the sort of work for which she imagined she had been trained, in order to deal with a domestic trifle of such a lowly nature. I said in that case I would give Ernest the job of walking through her room at 3:15 each afternoon, and she must put up with the interruption. Various biting retorts which rose to my lips I therefore forbore to utter, which made me feel unwontedly virtuous. We have dusted our own classroom each morning, and things have gone very smoothly. But with the colder weather coming, I can see that we shall have to accept Mrs. Pringle's return. Minnie finishes at Mrs. Annet's in a week's time, and the tortoise stoves, which have so far remained unlit, will soon be roaring away. Meanwhile, fired by the accounts from Miss Jackson of the excellent preserve which her mother concocted from the 2 Marrows, and at my wit's end to know just what to do with yet another monster which has appeared on the back doorstep, I decided to turn it into marrow jam. I collected a most delectable mass of ingredients on the kitchen table: lemon, ground ginger, sugar, and a small screw of greaseproof paper, which Minnie Pringle had brought from the chemist in Caxley, containing knobby, pale lumps of root ginger. It says, "Bruise the ginger," I remarked to Miss Jackson, who was busy filling up a copper for her bath. We pored over the recipe together. "How did your mother do that?" "Just banged it, I think," she said vaguely, "with a rolling pin or something." I carried my screw of greaseproof paper out on the back step. There was a cold wind blowing, and I anchored the ginger with a large flint while I found a hammer. I was busily pounding at my little parcel when Mr. Willett arrived bearing a brown paper carrier bag. "Don't like the way the wind's turned east," he said, blowing on his fingers. Fair shrammed I am, I can tell 'ee. Vicar would tell you he won't be able to get over this Friday after all. Got a funeral over at Springbourne." I said, was it anyone we knew? "Oh, no, no one that matters," said Mr. Willett airily. "Some old boy from London would only live there 2 or 3 months. Just come to die, so to speak." He peered down at my little parcel and the large hammer. "What are you up to?" "I'm bruising ginger," I replied. Busily, I unwrapped the folds of greaseproof paper and displayed the flattened contents. I looked at them anxiously. "Would you say I'd bruised that?" I inquired. Mr. Willett broke into a guffaw. "Bruised it? You damn well pulverized it." He laughed until he had to lean against the wall for support, while I collected these squashed remains carefully to get out of the wind's harm. "Oh, well," he said, recovering at last, "I'll get back to my supper. Steak and kidney pudding my old woman's had on the hob all day, and a dozen button mushrooms inside it. Proper sharp set I be. I'll do justice to that." I wished him good-bye and accompanied him to the corner of the house. "Oh," I said, looking back, "you've left your carrier bag." "That's all right," replied Mr. Willett cheerfully. "It's for you. It's a Marrow." We'll see if there are any more Marrows in the future. I think a Marrow is a cucumber in British. Next time.